the counseling and the resources and the therapy, right, that they need to become their whole self, which is the goal of any, right, doctor or caregiver and patient relationship, is that the caregiver is seeking to make the patient whole, right? They're not just seeking to throw at them some magic pill or throw at them some surgery. That there is something deeply within the human being that allows them to feel that uns, right? As the word insan comes from uns, right? That truly transcendent peace, right? And it is only through having an ecosystem of professionals that we can try to deliver our communities, right, from true darkness to light, right? And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, to allow us here at the Muslim Center of Greater Princeton to realize those great aspirations as we develop a truly unique and powerful system for each and every heart within this community, right? To find the solutions to their personal actualization, to their personal success and potential, whatever that may be. And you know, we alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, are so blessed to have, mashallah, all of these wonderful women, whether it's Sanya or Sana and Rahila, who is our new director of social services. Alhamdulillah, and we've already worked on multiple cases together. You know, so it's been such a blessing to have her. And Dr. Susie, mashallah, she's doing incredible work. Alhamdulillah. So we're also blessed to have these resources. And there are resources that are not up here today as well. There are other, mashallah, therapists and counselors in the community that are not up here. And so, inshallah, this is also a kind of just a beginning to the network that we can establish. So inshallah ta'ala, thank you all for being here tonight. And I'm sorry I can't be with you the rest of the night, but inshallah, you're left in great hands. Barakallah feekum, may Allah put barakah in all you do. And inshallah, please give these wonderful women your full attention. And make sure to ask some challenging questions too. Inshallah, barakallah feekum. So I will give here to Sister Rahila. And there you go. And I'm gonna borrow a bottle.
Social services here. Okay. Assalamualaikum everyone. I'm Rahila. I'm actually the new director of social services at Muslims MCGP. Just want to introduce myself. I'm actually a licensed social worker who, by profession, I actually do counseling. Part of my role in this, the Muslims MCGP, will be as a clinical therapist and as also a social worker who will provide any social services that the mosque will provide. So, and with me, we have Sana, Sanya, and Dr. Susie, who are actually going to do a little bit of introduction for themselves, and before we start the program.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Senna Malik. I'm also a member of this community. In my professional role, I'm a professor at Stony Brook University, and my background is in social work and public health. Alhamdulillah, I've had the opportunity to work both with Muslims and non-Muslims, and a lot of my research focuses on mental health concerns along with health disparities. So I'm very happy to see that there is programming such as this here at MCGP. It's certainly an area that we have a great need for in our community, and it's great to see this many people, show up to learn about this. So thank you, and I look forward to speaking with you later.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Sanya Siddiki. I am a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm a practicing psychotherapist. I've been in practice since 2014, and I also have a wide range of experience working with non-Muslims and Muslims, more recently with Muslim youth and women in the New Jersey communities. I was previously working at Olive Branch. Right now I'm taking a short leave with my baby, inshallah, but I plan to return back as a therapist in our community to also provide services in this community and of the great larger New Jersey community, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So I absolutely love MCGP and the community because it's when masajid start to realize and recognize how important and how integral mental health is for holistic wellness that we're really going to see changes in our community. So my name is Dr. Suzy Ismail. I run an organization called Cornerstone, which is a faith-based relational intervention organization. It's a little bit different than traditional mental health therapeutic interventions in that we focus on something that we like to call spiritual, psycho-socio-emotional wellness, which means the intersection of faith from an Islamic perspective, bringing in the Quran and the Sunnah as guidance for any advice that we give, a focus on the psycho elements, the psychological elements of the mental health without providing diagnoses. So we will not diagnose someone. That's where a lot of our mental health professionals will come in because we speak more to the socio-emotional and relational wellness. So working on the inside out and definitely incorporating that really important spiritual aspect.
We have about a few minutes before the Isha Namaz starts. So just before the Isha Namaz starts, I just wanted to lay it out there. What is mental health? What does everybody think as mental health is? Anybody, just, I'm going to ask anybody in the crowd, in the audience, what is their perspective of mental health?
Psychological well-being. Your psychological well-being.
All right.
Yeah. Psychological well-being, basically.
All right. And what else? Psychological? The mental?
Yes.
The health?
The wellness of the mind.
All right, that's good. The wellness of the mind, the psychological, the social, and the emotional. That plays a big factor. A lot of, in this Muslim community, in the Southeast Asian community, we do have a misconception of mental health that people think is a taboo. Oh, you must be crazy to see a psychiatrist. Oh, what is the problem? Oh, you have depression. What is wrong with that, But that's where the purpose of this workshop is going to be, to provide a little education about what is mental health. It's okay that if you need to see a psychiatrist or a clinical therapist, because we do have those barriers that we need to work on. All right, I think we're about to have Isha Namaz, so we can come back. Yeah, I know that the Isha Namaz is about to start in a couple minutes, so we can resume after that. All right? All right, inshallah.
I'm so enjoying this.
I'm about to go get some.
She's like, take your mask off.
Oh, is that what she's saying? I lecture in a mask for 2 to 3 hours straight. So I'm like,
I mean, I don't know, to be honest. I figured I'd listen to you guys and then fill in whatever was needed.
I love that, Susie, and I wish I had that skill. I could just be like, hey, I'm not there yet.
This is my first actual speaking
It's like, that's amazing. All right, amazing.
So I think she was gonna, well, you can speak on what you're gonna speak on.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about the importance of examining mental health from a Muslim perspective, and then cover some basic stats about the prevalence of mental health conditions in the United States and in Muslim countries. So pretty standard.
Yeah. So I'm probably gonna piggyback off that and just I think we'll all probably reiterate we need to not associate having depression with being a bad Muslim, talk about that kind of topic. And my main thing is gonna be how the first step that we have to do as a community is validate people. that what they're feeling is okay, like not that they're bad or they should hide it. Like it's basically the taboo part of it. I had wrote some notes on like symptoms of anxiety and depression. I won't go as detailed into it because I don't want to like overwhelm people, but I'll just say generally like, this is what the most common is most people with anxiety and depression, and if they have depression, they're thinking about it. And then at the end, just about the prophetic model, the holistic approach. That's what I'll end on.
That's a good segue.
Okay.
I will probably just select specific verses to put link back to understanding what's mental illness and how do we approach it. And some Islamic kind of mindfulness techniques that link back to it. But I'll take it from like the Islamic perspective.
That's a perfect segue because I'll be ending with the prophetic model, talking about like the year of sadness and Jesus.
Perfect. That works.
Nice. Okay, that's good. Good flow.
I'm gonna go get me some chai. I'll be back. So.
Well, you have some time now, so that's so funny. And for me, it was like Fridays are so hard. I hate school. The kids birthday party, and I'm just like.
Pass it along.
Yeah.
She's a
Start? Sure. Assalamualaikum, everyone. Ooh. I hope you guys had a nice break. Assalamualaikum. I know we're starting a little late, but it's okay. All right, so I just want to introduce myself again. I am the moderator for the program. We did a little introduction already. So Sana's going to actually start off with her, right, Sana? Yes, I just want to make sure Sana's doing next. So Sana's going to do her presentation in regarding to mental health.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum again. So I think most of you probably heard our introductions, but I think we're going to quickly introduce ourselves again. So my name is Senna Malik, and I am a professor at Stony Brook University, focusing on social work and mental health. Just quickly to start out, I know we heard some really awesome definitions of what mental health is, right? So we heard kind of this taking care of our minds and our bodies and our souls as part of that definition. So I'm curious to hear a few misconceptions or common kind of themes that we might hear in the Muslim community about mental health. You guys gave me really good definitions, right? What are some other things that you might hear about mental health in general, which are maybe not so positive? You're not religious enough, right? That's a really good one, and I think something we hear a lot, right? So people have mental health issues if they're not religious enough, okay? Anything else? Or you sinned in the past, and mental health is kind of a way that you are given, your dues for what you've done, okay? Anything else, Anita, since you're so good at this?
Or you have the gin in you.
You have the jinn in you. Okay, that's another really good one about mental health for sure. So I think, again, even though we heard some of the really positive definitions about mental health, this is kind of the other side of it that we hear pretty commonly as well. We hear this concept that all you need is Islam. Mental health is a Western concept. The Prophet never saw a therapist, right? So why is it that we need to focus on mental health? Did you have another one? Sorry. Okay, you are welcome to join us too on the stage. So last week I was here with my son for one of Imam Safwan's reminders to them, and one thing that he told them, and I think is a great kind of point of reflection for us as well, he reminded the youth that after every prayer, one of the most important dua to make is Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam, right? And the remainder of that dua is Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam, tabarakta ya dal jalali wal ikram, right? And when you think about the definition really of that dua, it is that, oh Allah, you are peace or serenity. From you is peace or serenity. Blessed are you, O possessor of majesty and honor. So again, when you think about kind of that dua and the importance of this concept of serenity, right? It really comes from a place of Islamic concepts and values. Some of those, again, misconceptions that we hear about often create this system where it's considered a taboo to speak about mental health or to seek help when you do have a mental health issue. But yet we know that from our prophetic tradition, from the Quran, from the Sunnah, that emotional hardships are very much a part of life, right? And we have examples from that throughout kind of our historical examples. When we create kind of these systems where it is considered a taboo, or when we have these common misperceptions, it creates these systems where people cannot seek help when they need it. So it's important to reflect on the fact that in Islam, our bodies are an amana, right? We are considered, our bodies are something that we are supposed to take care of. And along with our body comes our mind and our soul. So this is a responsibility for us, and it can be considered an act of ibadah, right? So anything we do to take care of ourselves and our bodies and our minds is a part of that. The prophets as well were not immune from emotional distress, right? And when you think about some of those examples, again, it shows even though they were the most perfect of our examples before us, again, they faced challenges which led to these emotional stresses. So just a few examples. I think many of you obviously know the story of Prophet Yaqub, but one example of that was when he was separated from his son, Prophet Yusuf, right? And in the Quran, we hear the story of how he faced this really intense sadness, right? This sadness of being separated from his son, which eventually, right, if you remember the story, he cried so much that it led to a weakening of his eyesight. But it really led to this prolonged period of grief. And in the Quran, there's a verse that said that he is taking his sadness and grief to Allah, right? And I think what's important to keep in mind about that is that grief and sadness, again, is something that the most perfect of our creation has been afflicted with. The Prophet ﷺ as well, I think everyone kind of knows about his year of sadness as well, right? With this year following the death of Khadija and his beloved uncle, and also at a time when there were, harsh environmental conditions that were affecting his community. So this is, again, another example of how the prophets before us really faced severe emotional stresses and conditions. Another example from the prophet's life is when his own son Ibrahim passed away. So in each one of these examples, again, we can think about and reflect how these are very much a part of life and a part of our Islamic tradition. The prophet at the time of facing these very difficult situations gave us, however, practical advice to deal with the conditions as well, right? So one thing that we might think of often is if you're feeling angry, what do you do if you're standing up? You're supposed to sit down. And if you're sitting down, what do? You're told to lie down, right? So this is a practical way to deal with an emotional hardship, right? In that case, anger. The prophet also told us not to bear the suffering in silence of any condition that we may face, right? So that includes physical health, but it also includes mental health as well. Islam really values the importance of good mental health and emotional well-being. And the Quran can be used as a guide to those suffering from both emotional distress and aims to lead people to a meaningful quality of life, right? And one hadith that we have is that there's no disease that Allah has created except that he has also created for it a treatment, right? Except for old age, right? So this is another example where it is our responsibility as a community to not only provide services, but also to support those who are facing mental health challenges. And I think when we, again, take the taboos away from this concept of mental health challenges, I think we all realize that, there's all of us are struggling with certain things related to our both physical health and mental health, right? So the better that we can face them, the more apt we are as a community to kind of move forward and to improve ourselves and our community as well. Another example of really showing, right, so even though the concept is there that Islam, may not recognize mental health, again, our traditions show us otherwise. I think many of you know the du'as that the Prophet used to mention, and in his morning and evening du'a, one of the things that he would often recite is, "O Allah, I seek refuge in you from worry and grief." Okay, so again, kind of normalizing this idea of emotional hardship, worry, grief, sadness, etc. And just also keeping in mind, right, that the way we look at it, the way we normalize it, and also the way that we can reframe the issue really helps us to address the concepts better. We know that whoever Allah intends good for, He actually sends upon them affliction that betters them, right? So again, if we consider that both physical and mental health illnesses can actually help us to improve ourselves, then it can be a source of improvement, right? But this is really only if we can deal with it in the most appropriate manner, right? So if you consider the concept of fasting, right? And if you only fast by removing food and water from your day, there's only a certain amount of benefit you get from fasting, right? And it's the same with kind of dealing with mental health conditions as well. If we don't reflect on kind of the challenges of our own internal struggles, then we certainly can't benefit in the same manner as well and improve ourselves and our community. So these are all just kind of important things to think about and normalize kind of the concept of mental health in the Muslim community. Just thinking about kind of the prevalence and the importance of focusing on mental health as well. Mental health illnesses are becoming more and more common in the United States and throughout the world. Actually, currently about 1 in 5 US adults live with a mental illness. So that's over 50 million people in the United States, right? Which is a huge, huge number. And this really, there's so many different conditions that fall under the umbrella, and it also varies kind of in the degree of severity that people kind of deal with the mental health issues. But certainly, it's something that is incredibly common. And some of the groups and populations that are really at high risk are young adults, right? So from this age of 18 to 35. Females, obviously, I think have been considered at higher risk, but now we know more and more there are certain mental health conditions that males are at high risk for as well. And we know that minority communities tend to have higher rates of mental health conditions, aside from certain groups as well. So even though we think, right, and I think the common perception is that Muslims are immune from these mental health challenges, data is starting to show us otherwise. So one recent study that came out in JAMA Psychiatry looked at suicide rates amongst American Muslims. And I don't know how many of you actually saw that, but American Muslims are actually twice as likely as any other religious group to have reported a previous suicide attempt. Okay? And I think that's just kind of a staggering statistic for us to keep in mind, and to show us really that the Muslim community, again, is not immune from these mental health conditions, but rather that we may be at higher risk, again, because of a host of different factors, right? And some of those factors include that, mental health is stigmatized and people can't get help if they potentially need it. There's oftentimes kind of gaps in terms of immigrant communities and communities that were born here, in terms of kind of having greater understanding. Along with that, there's obviously stressors that are related to discrimination that Muslims face, and actually that was kind of one of the predicting factors as well. So for individuals that did face higher levels of discrimination, they were more likely to have higher suicide rates as well. So again, all of these factors, again, are really important for us to keep in mind when we think about kind of how our community is potentially impacted by a whole host of mental health conditions. Another factor, obviously, which I think so many of us have faced is the challenges that are associated with COVID, right? And again, each one of us has been impacted in very real ways by COVID. And certainly the rules that were put into place to protect, again, our physical health led to kind of a lot of social isolation and loneliness throughout a number of different communities. So thinking about how isolation and loneliness impacts our overall health and mental health as well, those two factors have been really linked in a lot of different ways. So as part of my kind of program of study, we did a survey of young adults in New York, again, 18 to 35-year-olds, and found, again, really, really alarming rates of both anxiety and depression amongst those that did complete our survey. So again, prior to the pandemic, we were finding rates of about 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 young adults having mental health issues. And what we found was in our survey, about 80% of young adults were reporting high levels of anxiety. So 80% of young adults. And then similarly, about the same number that were reporting levels of depression, which were at, again, rates that would qualify as having, a clinical diagnosis. So again, really kind of alarming numbers in relation to kind of the real impacts of COVID on mental health. I think what's more concerning than that is that fewer than 10% of our population had a diagnosis of any mental health condition, and less than 20% had actually ever received mental health treatment. So I think in combination of, having these high rates of mental health conditions along with kind of this lack of treatment creates, again, these systems where we really kind of focus on what the needs are. So those are kind of just some general statistics about COVID, mental health, Islam in general, and how we are to view mental health. And I think just to close out, I think the title of this talk is so fitting when we talk about the Muslim mental health ecosystem. And what I want you to keep in mind is that really when we think of an ecosystem, it's really this interrelated and complex system, right, in so many ways. And what's important with that is that every single being, creature, the environment is a part of the ecosystem. So I think it's important for each one of us to recognize our own roles in that ecosystem, right? Whether we might be struggling with our own mental health, whether we know someone that is, thinking about kind of how we provide services in our masajid or in our communities at large. Each one of us can have a role in really impacting mental health in our communities. So first and foremost, kind of recognizing the importance of it and seeing where we ourselves can kind of normalize these discussions, right? With maybe starting with our families or starting in our places of employment or whatever else it is, or here in the masjid. So I think each one of those is an important role, again, that we can play in our ecosystems. So with that, I will pass it on. Thank you.
Jazakallah, Sana. That was a really nice overall comprehensive view about our topic that we'll be discussing. So I'll kind of take it along from her, that we've kind of established now, that it is present in our community, right? Is by statistics we can see how common it is for many of our youth and our young adults and our adolescents. I mean, even as adults, how common it is mental health. So now what is the next step, right? So one of the first steps is first, like she has said, realizing what's your role in the community, right? So are you someone who is struggling with mental health? Do you have a family member, a friend, a child, a parent even who's struggling with it, right? And that's what we kind of want to look at, is that what we kind of talked about in the beginning, which was that not associating that just because you do have something, you're struggling with mental health, that it's a sign of being a bad Muslim. You can't just be grateful and push it away. You can't just stop thinking about it and feel better, right? People will say, oh, you're fine, you have everything you need, why are you depressed, right? So the issue with these kind of statements, right, and sometimes many people are really trying to be helpful. It's not coming from a place of malintent. It's really coming from trying to help someone. Well, what that does is it really negates a person's feeling. It dismisses them, right? And it makes them feel like what they're feeling is not appropriate. And if you are someone who is feeling depressed or you're feeling anxious and someone comes and tells you that, oh no, why are you feeling anxious? You're fine. you are going to have a very struggled, you're going to be confused. And then especially for our children and our youth who are looking for validation, who are looking for their parents' support or family members or community support, and then they're told not to feel this way, it can cause a lot of confusion. So what is the first step? The first step is really something we use as therapists, and anyone can use, is really validation, right? So validating these emotions and struggles that our youth and our community is having, is that to be there for them, that I hear you, I support you, and I want to help you. How can I help? Even if you have no experience in mental health, or you may not even know how to reach out to anyone, it's just about validating that person's feelings, right? Being there for them and understanding where they're coming from. Like Senna had said, the two of the most common disorders we see in Muslim communities and non-Muslim communities is anxiety and depression, right? So, what is anxiety? What is depression? Now, anxiety is something that, both of them, we all are kind of familiar. We've all felt sometimes feelings of anxiousness and sometimes feeling of depression, right? Whether it's situational or some situations make us nervous. But we really want to be able to look at that, it's a lot more than that, right? So when we hear someone feeling anxious, it's like, oh, it's okay, just like everything will be fine. But for people who are struggling with anxiety disorder, it's a lot more than that. They have racing thoughts, they have insomnia, overthinking. It's really taking over their entire day, entire life, right? So, and the same with depression, it's feelings of sadness, feeling hopelessness, anger outbursts, right? So it's a lot more than is presented on the surface, and that's the thing with mental health, is that we don't really see what's happening outside, right? We feel like it'll be fine, just forget about it. So really looking out for the signs and symptoms, especially for our youth and our children, as parents, as adults, or even our siblings, is going to be really one of the first steps to be our role in the ecosystem around us. So really validating it for each other and being there for them. Now the next step is, okay, we've been there, how can we find a therapist, right? What is a therapist? So I'm actually going to throw this question back at everyone else. When you hear the word therapy, what do you think of? Or, what do you think therapists do, or what do we talk about in session? You can just shout it out.
Calm you down.
Okay, calm you down. Anyone else? Hear you out. Walk you through it. So those are some positive examples. What would be some negative views that you may have heard of going to a therapist?
Overcharging.
Okay. That's a good one too. Overcharging. Anyone else? Giving you medication, putting you on drugs, putting on medications. Okay. Any taboos of going to therapy? What would be a reason not for people to go to therapy? Yeah, mental health issues, right? I think you're great. Yes, thank you. So that's what I was kind of looking for. So that's a huge one, right? And I think in our Muslim community, I can only speak for South Asians, but is that it's a really hard thing to go to someone and reveal all your troubles to and your personal issues to, because what if I know the therapist? What if she knows someone that I know, or he knows someone I know? Are they going to find out? Are they going to know that I have thoughts of suicide, right? So that becomes a huge problem, right? But what I want to explain to you is, as a therapist, right, it's the same laws, the HIPAA laws that apply to physicians, to doctors, is that you can't reveal this kind of information, right? If they're a good therapist, a good counselor, that information is kept private, and that's something we want to reiterate, that we want Muslims to go to therapists, right? Because we want them to understand that this is a safe space for you. This is where you can talk about your issues, your concerns, what's going on, in a safe space where someone can help you without those biases. And I think that's why there's a more need, and there's, alhamdulillah, a much more greater resources that are happening with Muslim therapists and Muslim counselors and interventions that are happening now, because the issue becomes, when we went to therapists that were not Muslim, then they don't understand where we're coming from, right? They don't understand our religion, they don't understand our culture. So now there's this huge need, and it's really great to see here at MCGP that we're actually having a division that's called social services, because it's such we have these talks, and the talk finishes and everyone's empowered, and then everyone just goes home, right? But the great thing here now is that we are having resources, we are providing services, right? Which we'll go into more at the end. But that's kind of the step, is figuring out what therapy is and that it is a safe space for you and it's not that you're crazy. And many people come to therapy not for, sometimes they don't really necessarily have an anxiety disorder or depression disorder, but they just need to talk through things, to figure out, to make decisions, to kind of guide them through, right? To kind of just counsel them to figure out where they need to go. The last point I'm going to end on, and then I'll pass it to Dr. Susie, is, we've kind of reiterated, is really the holistic approach, right? So we have the therapy aspect, but, as Muslims, our faith is very important to us, right? So looking at the prophetic model. The great thing is now, through many institutions like the Yaqeen Institute and the Khalil Center, that they are now developing a lot of Islamic psychotherapy techniques that combine the modern, what we know about, cognitive behavioral therapy and from the Quran and Sunnah. So the prophetic model, right? So I'll just quickly go through how the prophetic model is kind of applied. And, the first point is really taqwa and tawakkul. So the Prophet ﷺ, he always had tawakkul in Allah, right? He believed in, he had faith in Allah's plan for him, right? And he had taqwa, that Allah would be there for him, right? Second thing was compassion, right? And this is something we also can apply to our own lives, to other people who are struggling with mental health, is having compassion for those who are struggling with mental health. Because the Prophet ﷺ, as we know, was always compassionate. He was known as someone who was so merciful, right? The famous story when someone threw garbage on him, not only did he not retaliate, he went to go check on her when the old lady wasn't there who threw garbage on him. So that compassionate model needs to be present more than ever to our own Muslim community when they are struggling with a lot of mental health. The third thing, and Sana touched upon this, was, he was attuned to his own emotions. So when he had that year of sadness, right, he acknowledged it and he accepted it. Right? Specifically when his wife Khadija anha passed away, and when he buried his son Ibrahim, he felt those emotions. He didn't dismiss them, right? He didn't say, "Oh, it's fine. I'll be fine," or it's all gonna be okay. He felt the sadness. He grieved their loss, right? But then he also had that tawakkul on Allah, that it will be okay. But he didn't dismiss those emotions. He reframed his thoughts into Allah's will and His plan, right? So while he was acknowledging he was upset and he felt that deep sadness, he also acknowledged that Allah will help and guide him through it. And the last point is that, what we call coping mechanisms now, he gave us the three best coping mechanisms, right? Which is dua, salah, and meditation, right? He contemplated, he really thought about it, and he really prayed to Allah, and he did dhikr and remembrance of Allah. So as a Muslim community, we already established that we have to really change our viewpoints about what mental health is, and that's definitely happening a lot more than it was even just 5 years ago. That it's a lot more acceptance of it and how we can help, especially the youth that are growing up in today's society. And then the second thing is that to seek a therapist, to seek help, and to be there and validate everyone around us. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Starting off with a reminder of why we're here and what it is that we're talking about. The recognition that because we believe, being in the masjid, recognizing that our faith is an important part of who we holistically are, we recognize that the compassion and the mercy of God is something that guides many of us in our lives. But as we were praying Isha, for those of you who were here for the prayer earlier, I was listening to the recitation of Sheikh Ismail and the verses from Surah Nuh, which he was reciting. And upon completing prayer, I was reflecting, subhanallah, that in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal gives us example after example after example of the hardships that our prophets have been through, just as the sister had said previously. And in that chapter in the Quran in particular, when Sheikh Ismail recited those verses and we listened to the trials of Nuh alayhi salam, where he called to his people, he spoke the truth and yet no one listened. They put their fingers in their ears, they covered themselves, and they responded in arrogance. How many of us have been in situations where we felt rejected? How many of us have been in situations like the Prophet Nuh, when we are reminded in Surah Hud, calls out to Allah and asks Him to save his son, to not allow him to be of the disbelievers, to bring him back on the right path? How many of us have made that dua for our own children? We are not immune to the tests that we are promised we will be tested with, because in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us that surely you will be tested. And you will be tested with what? With fear. You will be tested with loss, a loss of wealth, a loss of life. We're all tested, and we're tested in different ways. And so when we speak about mental health, when we speak about seeking a counselor, when we speak about looking for avenues of help, it is so important that we recognize it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay. But it's not okay to look away and say, you know what? It is what it is. I just have to deal with it. I have to suffer in silence. I can't talk to anyone about what I am going through. Before we enter into a difficult situation, before we are faced with a test, a written exam, before we give a speech, before we are presented with a challenge, we often turn to the dua of Musa alayhi salam. The dua of Musa when he was tasked with the very difficult charge of go speak to Fir'aun, go speak to your worst enemy, and call him to Allah. A difficult test. And Musa alayhi salam turns to Allah Azza wa Jal in that moment and says, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةَ مِنْ لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. And he asks Allah to expand for him his chest, to ease for him his task, to loosen his tongue so that they may understand. How many of us have felt misunderstood? How many of us have felt that the words that we say, the feelings we're trying to share, whether it's with our spouse, with our children, with our community, with our friends, are not landing? We're not heard, we're not seen. And here in this moment, when Musa alayhi salam is speaking to his Lord, he speaks these words. But what's even more beautiful, when we continue in the surah, when we continue in this chapter to see what happened next, we see that Musa alayhi salam continues past this dua and asks Allah Azza wa Jal if he may take someone with him on this journey, if he may face this test not alone, if he may take his brother Harun by his side. Why? Because we were never meant to go through our tests alone. We were never meant to face these obstacles alone. And when we talk about mental health, so many times we see almost this dismissal. Well, I don't really have depression, I'm just a little bit sad. I don't really have anxiety, I just get worried sometimes. I don't have paranoid or OCD thought patterns, I just focus on things a lot. But if that little bit of sadness, if that fear, if that thought that is repetitive impacts our functionality, stops us from finding contentment, blocks us from being able to live our lives and feel a connection, not just with Allah Azza wa Jal, but with the people in our lives who surround us, then we are facing a test. And it's a test that we're not supposed to face alone. It's a test that Allah Azza wa Jal has given pathways to connect with others. And yes, those connections very often come in the form of a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. If you were to break your leg, if your child were to suffer an injury, God forbid, and let's say that broken leg is throbbing, it hurts, it's painful, it stops you from being able to walk, it stops you from being able to drive, it's affecting your functionality. Would you wake up one morning and say, well, you know what, I'm gonna go to the halal butcher and have him take a look at it because, he's zabiha and, it's Islamic? Or would you say, you know what, I've got to get myself to a hospital, I've got to get my child x-rayed, I have to go to an expert in that field to see what's going on and to find relief from that pain? the pain that we have in our hearts, the pain that we have in our minds is not a figment of our imagination, nor is it a blight or a punishment from Allah Azza wa Jal. It is a test, because we will be tested, and we will be tested in so many different ways. But that test is not one that we should ever ignore. It's a test that we need to seek out. Who will be our wazir? Who will be the one that walks beside us through this pain? And no, it shouldn't be the halal butcher, right? It should be someone that is an expert in that field. And so I think coming together in gatherings like this, being able to speak openly about these topics, being able to reference Aam al-Huzn, the year of sorrow that the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam experienced, being able to reference the time of Ta'if when the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam faced such difficulty and pain and rejection, and to know that we are not alone. To reference Maryam alayha salam, who in a moment of difficulty, when she felt the pain of labor, she calls out to her Lord and says, "Ya laytani mitt qabla hadha wa kunti nasyan mansiya." Oh, if only I had passed before this and had been of those who were forgotten. How many of us, how many of our children have faced a difficult test and have woken up one morning and said, "You know what, I wish I wasn't here." This is not an indication of weakness of Iman. Maryam alayha salam, one of the women who is chosen and promised Jannah, spoke these words. And yet what is most beautiful is the response she received. Nudiya min tahtiha, a voice calls to her from beneath her, "La tahzani, do not be sad." The voice does not call and tell Maryam, "Be grateful." The voice does not call and tell Maryam alayha salam, "Read more Quran, pray 2 rak'ahs." The voice is a comforting voice that says, "La tahzani, do not be sad." And Maryam alayha salam is commanded to look to the stream that runs beneath her and to shake the trunk of the palm tree so that the fruits may fall. She is commanded to take an action. So brothers and sisters, I would ask you today, what action will you take? What action will you take when you leave this gathering? Because Allah Azza wa Jal has decreed for you to be chosen, to be in this gathering tonight, to listen to these words, to recognize and understand that the resources do exist in our communities. What action will you take? Will you reach out to a friend who may need these resources? Will you yourself take that step? Because there is no shame in seeking help. There is no shame in recognizing that we are all tested. And it is okay to not be okay. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you, Sanya, and Dr. Susie for the presentation on mental health. Part of a growing need for mental health, MCGP decided to expand these programs. We will be conducting this as a regular basis on monthly basis. And part of that is we will be providing counselings and anything social services that we will be doing. I will be here Mondays and Fridays, and any other days that if we need it, I'll be here. Part of my job is to provide counseling, overseeing, with the help of Brother Salim, I'll be overseeing the zakat. We also have community resources. If we ever need any counseling, any support, just saying, "I need help." And we also do follow the HIPAA law that if you do need help, we keep that confidential. We are not even allowed to recognize that you are being seen by one of us. So that confidential does plays a big factor. So we do have free clinic. If you ever need anybody just saying, "I need to see you," just come in, see us, and just asking yourself, "Are you okay?" Asking your neighbor, "Are you okay?" Because especially with the pandemic, it has been really, a lot of mental health has been affected. A well-being, a mentally healthy person has been affected too. Just ask your neighbor, are you okay today? All right, so I know it's pretty much time is up, so I just want to thank everyone. If anybody has questions, we do have a few minutes left. Any concerns they want to ask? Any from our panelists that they like to ask?
I think one of the things you spoke about was the stigma of mental health, especially in the Muslim community and the Asian community. Wanted to get your additional insights on, do you feel there's a lack of access to mental health providers in our community? Versus, when you talk about the care continuum, you go see your primary care. I think a lot of us are afraid to open up even to our primary care provider. Say, okay, I'm feeling depressed. So, that's a barrier right there. And then also when you talk about the overall umbrella, you're talking about domestic violence, marriage counseling, family counseling, all these other issues that are related to mental health. So do you feel there's a lack of awareness, or what are the barriers to accessing that? Are there a shortage of therapists? Do you feel there's a need for that? And in our community, we're trained not to show weakness, not to show emotion, So even if we do go, honesty is very important to open up, and we're just not trained to do that.
Yeah.
So, say a child goes to his parents, he might first have, hesitation to tell his parents that he's feeling depressed. Parents might say, okay, let's go see the imam. The imam might not be trained to deal with that kind of situation. So what are the overall barriers and, insight on these issues?
Right, Jazakallah khair. I think that's a great question. I'll start, and then maybe if anyone else wants to add to it. You also asked a really good question previously, or you made a comment about the deterrent of finances and that being difficult as well. So I do believe that the resources are there. They're there in different shapes and forms. And sometimes when we think of counselor, we Google psychologist and we see like 1 or 2 Muslim names and we're like, there's not enough there. But when we talk about therapeutic interventions, there's many different sources. And I'll just speak from what we do at Cornerstone, and maybe the other panelists can speak about their practices and the work they do. So for example, Cornerstone is a nonprofit organization. And as I mentioned, we provide faith-based relational intervention. We do have LACs on staff, which are licensed associate counselors. We also have social workers on staff. We have neuroscientists on staff. We actually have, I believe, we are up to 23 offices now internationally. We also provide virtual televisits. We have, a team that we make sure that no one is ever rejected. We have a sliding scale fee approach where everyone is offered financial aid. We have some clients that pay $5 a session, clients that are completely covered if there's zakat eligible or refugee clients, and some clients that pay the full price for a session. And I guess I'm using this as an example because I do believe the resources are there. Sometimes when we are in a dark place, we feel like we don't want to look for them, or we feel like it's difficult to look for them. And that's why programs like this are so beneficial, because when you know what resources are there, when you have the name of someone kind of in your head and you can say, oh, there's this program. I know that right now, post-pandemic, as counselors, as interventionists, we are all, booked pretty solid. I know for me personally, I think I'm booked out till July. But our team, we make sure that there is at least 1 or 2 interventionists who have openings in their calendar that can be done like the next day. So I do believe we're seeing more and more of alternative therapeutic interventions. At Cornerstone, we have a division for marriage and family. We have a division for youth. We have a division for refugees. We have a division for anger and loss. There's also a movement now towards trainings where there's a Muslim mental health first aid training that I believe many people here in the masjid took. MCGP is one of the masajid we're partnering with, where we provide a youth intervention training, which is a 6-month-long program. Not necessarily to be the last stop, because yes, if you're struggling with a mental health illness and something that needs to be diagnosed, it's a first step. It may be that the imam has taken this training and now they're ready to guide you towards other resources, to be the stopgap. Sister Rahila mentioned that she's here in the masjid. There's a free clinic. I believe the resources exist and they will continue to grow. If you take a look at Stanford, the Islamic Psychology Lab, for instance, that's coming out there, we partner with Duke, Princeton University, and several other universities around the world. We're developing programs at college levels that provide faith-based intervention with an Islamic lens. It's there. It's just about looking, it's about asking, it's about seeking. And if you're in a dark place, sometimes it's talking to a friend who can do the looking, seeking for you.
Long-winded answer.
I'll just touch upon that as well. So I agree, the resources are definitely there, and I think because of COVID pandemic, a whole new world opened up, which is a virtual, right, and telemedicine and teletherapy. And whereas prior to COVID, we would, even as therapists, I think when we first had to go virtual, it was very weird for us because it was like, how do we not talk to someone in person? But over time, we adjusted as humans do, and it actually opened up a really brand new world that you were able to connect with so many more people. I could be in central Jersey, but I could see people from all over New Jersey, right? And not even licensures, not even across state lines are being approved and everything. So the resources are there, and there's one center called Khalil Center, which is also now providing services even across state lines. You kind of contact them, and they have Muslim therapists on staff to kind of help you. And also touch upon is that sometimes we're not aware of the licensing, so it's a little confusing. It's like, what are you, a social worker? Are you a therapist? It's kind of confusing. So there are many roles that can be therapists. There's, like you said, there's psychologist. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, which is also a psychotherapist. There's counselors itself. There's mental health counselors. So it's a little confusing at first, but if you look into it, all of them are qualified to provide the therapy for you. And the last point is that, of course, we can always use more therapists, right? So that's never something that could never be enough of. So if you have people if you have children that want to be a therapist, if you have young adolescents, definitely encourage them, because it is a huge need in our community, and it could always benefit. And it's something it's obviously, of course, a great field to go into too. Someone else had a question or other questions?
I think somebody in the back has a question. Let me come back. Thank you.
We can clearly see the child is struggling, either the behavior or anything else. And not being a trained professional, we suggest them. But what should we do from the administrative perspective if we can clearly see all the symptoms in the child, but the parents themselves are in denial? I myself send them so many emails and resources and links, and I send them Khalil and Cornerstone and Olive Branch and everything. How can I help that parent to understand that, hey, this is the point, your child needs help, please do something, help them, because the later they will in the middle school or high school, the challenges are going to be more severe than what is right now. So if you can just help, how to help the parents. Jazakallah khair.
You want to take one? Give it to the therapist.
You got it. Hi, this is another great question. And again, I think the fact that we are trying to raise awareness is the first step, so not keeping it silent. When we see someone that needs help, being able to say, hey, this is concerning. I do feel like, your child may need help, or telling a parent they themselves may need help. But how we approach it can definitely be either very polarizing or very inviting. So one thing, for example, that we often do at Cornerstone is not necessarily using the term therapy, right? But saying instead, you know what, there's an intervention program that might help in some of the areas that, I notice there are some struggles, right? And don't necessarily focus just on the child. You might say, maybe as a family, you could go and check them out, or, maybe you could see what it is that they offer. There are still deep stigmas around the terminology. And I think we're not there yet to completely eliminate the stigmas around the terminology. So let's use other terminology. For example, with a lot of our refugee clients, for example, we use the terminology guidance, and whatever language we tend to be speaking in, Pashto, Dari, Arabic, Congolese, Tigrinya, Tamil, all of the languages that we offer support in, we translate the word counseling to guidance. And there has been a huge difference just in how responsive people are to the word guidance as opposed to counseling or therapy. Many of you may be familiar, if you were to look at the Arabic word for psychiatrist, it's colloquially kind of translated into crazy doctor. So you're telling someone, go to the crazy doctor right off the bat that you've probably lost them. Use different terms. Try to tell them, hey, there's this place that offers really good guidance. They take it from an Islamic perspective. They talk about parenting, they talk about identity. Maybe you want to check them out. Get them through the door, if you can, as a first stop. And from there, hopefully, they'll start to see that, hey, this isn't too bad.
She answered it perfectly. I'm not going to advocate.
Just to add to that as well, as kind of a former school administrator, I will say one of the most important predictive factors in terms of long-term outcomes for young people is having an adult that they can connect with. And that can be really any adult. So in addition to kind of guiding the family to seek guidance or help from whatever sources there are, I think, again, thinking about your role in the ecosystem is really thinking about how you can provide an ear, a shoulder, someone for that young person to speak with, right? Whether you have the training or not, again, each one of us, I think, can provide support to others in our community. And I think that's one of the ways, like Dr. Susie said, right? We seek support. We make to offer it, but one of the things that we can do is recognize that support comes in many different forms from many different people. So just ensuring that you're creating a safe space where that child doesn't feel polarized or made to feel badly about those behaviors that they might be exhibiting, but really trying to get at some of the underlying reasons for them is important as well.
All right. Any more questions? All right, just overall, MCGP is actually expanding, just not only being a mosque, is expanding their programs, and one of them is to provide counseling, oversees the Zakat programs, and dealing with the refugee program. So if you do need any support and help, we are always updating our websites, so all the community resources will be up there. So if you need anything when it comes to mental health or counseling, please do reach out to us, one of us, anybody from the panelists. We can always refer anybody that you need. We have a lot of psychiatrists in the room. I'm not mentioning names, but we do have psychiatrists in the room. So, all right. And no more questions, I guess, pretty much. Thank you.
I don't know how to turn these off.
Parents need to pick up their children from upstairs by 9:45.
If you have children upstairs, they need to be picked up by 9:45. Thank you. Her dad is a psychiatrist, that's why.
Whose dad is? Oh, I didn't realize
My
that.
husband's a psychiatrist too.
Oh, no way. I didn't realize that either.
I didn't want to mention anybody's
Oh
name.
my gosh, is your husband here too? You should totally come. Oh,
Shirt on?
oh, got it. Okay, fun. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
he's a great
it.
researcher. Yeah, he's here. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I think so. Yes. Yeah. I think we can all do a great deal to impact.
Do you have us right here? Or?
Actually,
Okay, I need that.
He is very full, but
It was wonderful, ladies.
Thank you so much.
Panel, very well spoken.
It was so nice
Good
meeting you.
answer. Yeah.
No, it's very nice meeting you. I'm sure our paths will cross again through that.
Yeah. I'll if
Yes, you
I
got my
have
contact
funds,
info,
I will
right? Perfect.
make
That sounds really
referrals.
good. Very
Yeah,
good.
if you want to collaborate, I would be happy to. I do mostly parenting, court-ordered parenting.
Wonderful.
People who go through divorce or custody battles,
Yes, I'll come down.
they need co-parenting.
Yeah, so we do have
Intervention and
That's what I do. I am not Muslim, but it's a resource.
and we provide just that for whatever reason we just make sure that we're not strictly saying people like their faith if their faith is something that's important. So much of that. Awesome. Were you able to find anything?
I didn't come prepared.
Okay, I had a few.